Good morning and welcome. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Society of Albany. I am Al DeSalvo and I'm the Service Associate for today. This morning, we welcome to our pulpit Pat Lamanna and Richard Mattocks. Pat is the president of the UU Fellowship of Poughkeepsie and an award-winning songwriter. Richard Mattocks is an environmental scientist. They met at the UU Fellowship of Poughkeepsie, where they are both members. They also share a love of folk music and travel. We begin with these words. We need every resource of mind, heart, and will to have any realistic hope of addressing the grave nuclear dangers to the peoples of the world and other life forms with whom we coexist on our beautiful planet. These dangers have been exposed as never before in this century by the Ukraine war and by the unfolding global crisis it portends. And yet, there is little evidence that the depth of this challenge has been understood, much less acted upon. Ever since atom bombs were dropped on Japanese cities in 1945, the peoples of the world have lived beneath a dark shadow of potential nuclear catastrophe. Over the decades, more countries have acquired and developed nuclear weapons, and from time to time, confrontations have raised fears that a war would be fought with these deadly weapons of mass destruction. The Cuban Missile Crisis of 1962 was an occasion on which a horrific nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union was averted, due mostly to good luck and prudent leadership. Small steps have been taken with the goal of making nuclear war less likely, but nine countries retain nuclear arsenals and work to refine and make their weapons combat ready. These countries seem as determined as ever to retain this terrifying approach to protect the interests of their own societies. Now, before we are engulfed in flames, while there is still time, while we still can, wake up. That is a quote from David Krieger. Our prelude is up next. And it is Last Night I Had the Strangest Dream by Ed McCurdy, and Pat Lamanna is the musician.
The words will be on your screen. Would you move to the next slide, please? Because I'd love for you to sing along if you would like. If you don't already know it, you'll pick up the tune. Maybe you'll get it by the second verse. Last night I had.
Please join in the chalice lighting words shown on the screen. Welcoming all free seekers of truth and meaning, we gather to excite the human spirit, to inspire its growth and development, to respond morally and ethically to a troubled world, and to sustain a vital and nurturing religious community. Next, we'll sing a unison song of the words will appear on the screen again. Please join in singing This Is My Song, the music, of course, by Jan Sibelius and the words by Lloyd Stone, and Pat is the service song leader.
And if you have the hymnal, what's number 1?
Welcome to our viewers on Facebook who will be joining us now for our service. I am Al DeSalvo and I'm the Service Associate today. We welcome to our pulpit Richard Mattocks and Pat Lamanna. They are from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Poughkeepsie and a musician and peace activists.
Let us be at peace with our bodies and our minds. Let us return to ourselves and become holy ourselves. Let us be aware of the source of being, common to us all and to all living things, evoking the presence of the great compassion. Let us fill our hearts with our own compassion towards ourselves and towards all living beings. Let us pray that we ourselves cease to be the cause of suffering to each other. With humility, with awareness of the existence of life and of the sufferings that are going on around us, let us practice the establishment of peace in our hearts and on earth. Amen. Thich Nhat Hanh.
Richard and I both were very moved and affected when in our childhoods, growing up in very different families and in different parts of the country, we learned about the bombing of Hiroshima. Both of us had dreamed all our lives of making a kind of pilgrimage to Hiroshima. So when we decided to take a long vacation together, we agreed that we would go to Japan. We had many interesting adventures there, but we'll save most of those for another time. Today, we want to tell you about what we saw, learned, and experienced on our visit to Hiroshima, and subsequently through research about the bombing of that city by the United States on August 6, 1945.
Why was the bomb dropped? And why Hiroshima? What was the earliest age that you can remember seeing this picture? I was about 5 or 6 years old, and at that time, I felt moved that I've got to see this. In the next few minutes, my intention is for you to understand some of what led to the Hiroshima bombing, and to the extent possible, for you to feel, hear, see, and sense the utter devastation of the bomb. We will not show the pictures of suffering and carnage that we've all seen and been sickened by since childhood. So, the Pacific War was going well for the Japanese in 1942 and 1943. Advantage was beginning to be lost as the Allies conquered island after island. Mid-1944, Saipan was taken from Japan, permitting construction of airstrips giving American high-altitude bombers ready access to the Japanese cities. The US dropped 157,000 tons of bombs on Japanese cities, according to the US Strategic Bombing Survey. While literally tens of thousands of bombing runs were made, the Allies repeatedly invited, requested, sued for, demanded, and even commanded the Japanese to surrender. The Japanese response was to ignore, if not outright, ridicule. Tokyo saw firebombings that killed 100,000 people with a new weapon called napalm. 270,000 Tokyo structures were destroyed in a single night. In the summer of 1945, Japan still had 7 million soldiers, half of which were in Japan, and they were not ready to quit. Military leadership said, quote, "If we are willing to sacrifice 20 million, victory will be ours," end quote. Some say their goal was to get the Allies to agree to an end of the war without Japanese dishonor. The Allies called for the unconditional surrender of the Japanese armed forces in the Potsdam Declaration on July 26, 1945. The alternative, according to the declaration, was, quote, "prompt and utter destruction," end quote. The Japanese response to this ultimatum was to ignore it. The atomic bomb was not mentioned in the communique. Now, the Manhattan Plan, in place since 1941, evolved to the production of weapons for use on Japan. The goals of the nuclear bombing were to, one, push the Japanese military to surrender to reduce American and Japanese casualties in the coming land invasion. Number two, to demonstrate to the Soviet Union the US dominance. And number three, choose sites for the ability to measure the impact of this extraordinary bomb. A total of 9 bombs were planned. Sites to receive the nuclear bomb were selected by a target committee of military personnel, as well as educated and well-informed professors and scholars. They chose sites that had larger than 3-mile diameters, were large urban areas, would clearly demonstrate the effective blast damage. And the fourth point that they pursued was finding locations that had not been significantly damaged by August 1945. This being, of course, to be able to better assess the effect of the bomb. Five sites were selected: Kokura, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, Kokura, Hiroshima, Yokohama, Niigata, and Kyoto. These were ports, and they were major military headquarters. They were manufacturers of munitions, steel, aluminum, oil, aircraft, machine tools, and power production facilities. They were also cultural centers. By the way, Kyoto was removed by the list largely because of the Secretary of War, U.S. Secretary of War's experience and knowledge of the city gained during his honeymoon in Kyoto. So he removed Kyoto and replaced it with Nagasaki. On the morning of August 6th, 1945, over 600 bombers took off from various islands for a run to the southern parts of Japan. Air raid sirens sounded across Japan, as often they did. One lone aircraft split off from all those others and flew to Hiroshima. That aircraft reported back weather conditions that were important to the flight of the Enola Gay and the 2 aircraft that accompanied the Enola Gay. One of these aircraft was for instrumentation, and the other was to photo document the bomb results. These 3 aircraft flew 6 hours in an indirect route, arriving at Hiroshima on August 6th, shortly after 8 o'clock in the morning. By that time, the air raid sirens had been turned off. In fact, the all clear had been sounded, and as always, no bombs had fallen. The citizens of Hiroshima had returned to their routine.
This is a song by Joe Crookston. To end the war.
The 5-ton, 15 kiloton nuclear bomb was released from 31,000 feet. At 8:15, it detonated a third of a mile above the city, 800 feet away from the intended target, the strategic Iowa bridge that spanned 3 rivers. By the way, the bomb exploded immediately above a clinic. The fireball was 1,200 feet in diameter. The sound of the blast at the ground level was estimated to be in the range of 240 decibels, the approximate equivalent of 2 chainsaws running full tilt 3 feet from your head. "1,500 kilotons is shorthand for 15,000 tons of dynamite. What does 15,000 tons of dynamite look like? Not yet. Imagine, these tech people are absolutely fabulous. You've got a great team up here. Imagine 15,000 tons of dynamite, 400, that's equivalent to 400,000 cubic feet of dynamite, or the equivalent of a football field, standard American football field, piled 7 feet high with that dynamite. The bomb leveled 5 square miles through a combined blast force and firestorm. The resulting fire created a 35-mile-per-hour windstorm, sucking air into the devastated area to feed the fire. Now, the bomb released its energy in 3 ways: radiation, wind, and heat. In the range of 3 to 5% of the energy was in the form of radiation. 50 to 60% of the energy was in the form of a wind blast. Imagine 1,000-mile-per-hour wind right at ground level. 200-mile-per-hour wind a mile away. Windows were shattered 13 miles away. But 30 to 40% of the energy was released in the form of heat, an estimated 63 terajoules of heat. 63 terajoules of heat. 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit at the ground level of the blast. 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit a mile away from the blast. Granite buildings melted. Steel bridges caught on fire, and tiles blistered a third of a mile away. What's 63 terajoules of heat? Imagine every American, each one holding 120 hair dryers, standard hair dryers, all pointing those hair dryers at this 5-mile area. The heat was immense. This nameless victim and Cain intercepted the bomb's energy that bleached the rock around. For perspective, To produce the equivalent of the damage of this one bomb, 220 B-29s would each have to drop 20 tons of a mix of conventional, incendiary, high explosive, and fragmentation bombs. Of the 60 buildings in Hiroshima, only 50 survived, were left standing, and these were had specifically been designed on seismic basis for earthquake resistance. Of these 50, all were gutted with fire, except for one. Of the 350,000 people present that morning, 70 to 80,000 were killed by the blast and the firestorm. 70,000 were injured. 70 to 80,000 died of radiation within the first year. Now, to put the destruction of this bomb in perspective, I put the same area right on top of Albany. Let's see the effect of detonating the device over the Empire State Plaza. The effect would be from the train station over by the Hudson all the way up to an area close to where we are now. And roughly from the I-90 interchange down to the I-87 interchange. A 2.5 mile diameter. And keep in mind that a 15 kiloton bomb is extraordinarily small by today's nuclear arsenal standard.
This song Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about our trip to Japan, how we visited the Peace Museum and Peace Park. On the left, you see our lovely guide, Miss Sato, who asked us to call her Sato-san. She's showing me a picture of what the dome looked like before the bomb fell, as we stand in front of the dome as it appears today. Next, please. Thank you. In January 1946, the city of Hiroshima decided, as part of its reconstruction, to build a peace memorial park dedicated to the abolishment of nuclear weapons on Earth. The cenotaph for the A-bomb victims was officially unveiled on August 6, 1952. In 1955, the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum was added, and additional buildings and monuments are continually being added. The cenotaph contains a stone chest housing a register of those known to have died of exposure to the bomb. Names are still being added, but as of August 6, 2006, it contained 247,787 names. The cenotaph is surrounded by the Pond of Peace, and across the pond, I hope you can see it, is the Flame of Peace, which will be extinguished when all nuclear weapons have disappeared from the Earth. Looking through the cenotaph, you can see the flame, and beyond it, the dome. This monument tells how and why it was decided to preserve the dome rather than demolish it, as was done to many other buildings in the area. Monuments such as this dot the Peace Memorial Park everywhere. We can only show you a fraction of the 63 monuments and shrines that are listed in this book, but I'll have it around after the service if you'd like to look. Some of the examples: Monument of the Hiroshima District Lumber Control Corporation. Monument to the employees of the Hiroshima Post Office. One monument that we found particularly moving was the monument in memory of Korean victims of the A-bomb. Between 30,000 and 40,000 Korean people, residents of the city and forced laborers brought from the Korean peninsula, were in Hiroshima at the time of the bombing. This is Japan's acknowledgement that Koreans were brought in as forced laborers and perished in the bombing, and they had always denied that they forced Koreans to work there. The peace clock across the river from Peace Memorial Park chimes at 8:15 a.m. every morning, the time the bomb was dropped. This memorial mound contains the ashes of approximately 70,000 victims of the bombing. Every year on August 6th, religious groups hold an interfaith ceremony at this site to console the souls of the victims. Sadako Sasaki developed symptoms of leukemia 9 years after the bomb fell, at age 11. There's a popular belief in Japan that if you fold 1,000 paper cranes, you will be granted your wish, and I see that you know about paper cranes. Sadako set to work folding cranes, hoping to save her life. According to one story, she got to 644 before she died. Her classmates folded 1,000 cranes and buried them with her. Ever since, Sadako has become a symbol of the innocent victims of war, and the paper cranes have been a symbol of peace. These are 2 cranes given to us by Sato-san that she made herself. The Peace Memorial Park in Hiroshima receives so many paper cranes, they don't know what to do with them all. They string them together in bright garlands and festoon them in booths, as you see here. When they have more than they can display, they turn them into paper, like these postcards, which Sato-san gave us, and they sell them at their gift shop. Sadako's classmates decided to erect a monument to comfort her soul and express a desire for peace. At the top is a girl holding a golden crane. Children stand in long lines, waiting their turn to ring the bell. Sato-san and I rang the bell together, and you see the girl at the holding the crane at the top more clearly in this picture. We went to the Peace Memorial Museum, but took very few pictures. That picture that Richard showed you with the red ball over the kind of relief map was one of the few pictures that we took there. It was almost unbearable to see the exhibits there. What was most moving to me were the torn scraps of clothing that parents had donated to the museum. All that was left of the clothing their children were wearing when the bomb struck. With each bit of clothing was a story. I found my daughter dying. We brought her home and tried to nurse her, but she died 3 days later. Or, I found my son's body, just a few scraps of clothing covering him. You can go to the Hiroshima Peace Memorial Museum website and see the pictures. I have a brochure with some of those pictures if you'd like to see them later. Those of you who are here in person, anyway. One of the few pictures I took in the museum was of this petition presented to us to sign on the way out. It reads, "We, the undersigned, request all states to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons as soon as possible." I used to bring copies of this treaty and ask people present to sign them. I don't have to do that anymore. The Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons has been ratified by 86 nations and went into effect on January 22nd, 2021. Without a lot of fanfare. How many people knew about that? It was maybe on page 42 of some of the papers. The treaty includes a comprehensive set of prohibitions on participating in any nuclear weapon activities. These include undertakings not to develop, test, produce, acquire, possess, stockpile, use, or threaten to use nuclear weapons. The Secretary General of the United Nations is designated as depository of the treaty. While this is a historic document and a rare and precious victory in the struggle for world peace, it should be noted that none of the current nuclear powers are signatories of the treaty. And as recent events remind us, and as that wonderful reading that Al gave at the beginning reminds us, we have a long way to go before world peace will be achieved. I close our presentation with this song, written by Rick Prezioso. It tells a story, and I don't know if it's true or not, of two women who were affected by World War II in different ways.
An important way we celebrate life each Sunday is by offering an opportunity to practice generosity. Members and friends support our congregation with an annual pledge paid throughout the year, but another way to support the good work of this congregation is by making a generous contribution as we pass the plate, or by way of one of the options that will be shown on this next slide. If you are joining us virtually, you can click on the tiny URL link in the chat window to contribute. Or you can send a text to the number shown on the screen. The examples on the slideshow show how to label your text to indicate the amount and the purpose or the intent of your gift. We now must say goodbye to our Facebook friends. Please consider joining us on Zoom next time, or better still, visit us at 405 Washington Avenue in Albany, New York. You can find more information at albanyuu.org. The offertory is the song When I'm Gone by Phil Oakes, and the musician is Pat Lamanna.
If you know it, join in. While I'm here,
We enjoy welcoming guests and visitors.
They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore, but they shall all sit under their own vines and fig trees, and no one shall make them afraid.
so this is supposed to be a
As we extinguish the chalice, please join in the words that you'll see on the screen. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I chose this benediction because it was written by a high school classmate of mine, Laura Lynn Bellarmine, and it's beautiful. If here you have found freedom, take it with you into the world. If you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace.
Today, our thanks to the musicians, Pat Lamanna, and our presenters, Pat and Richard Mattock. Ushers, Annika Pfluger and Kathy Harris, our pastoral care associate, Donna Meixner, service associate, that's me, Al DeSalvo, our welcomer, Bob Manning, our greeter, Val Kavanaugh, our office support by Tammy Goddard and Patience Prachette, and our technical support by Kate Pierce-Nims and Chuck Manning. And we have these announcements.